I am Jack Citron. I'm the director of IGS, and I want to join Ethan in welcoming you all to this event, California Votes, the 2014 election. I'll say a few words about IGS. IGS almost 100 years old. It's the oldest organized research unit on the Berkeley campus. And since its founding, it sought to expand understanding of American politics and governance by conducting research, working with students, and holding events like this one, which bring together people who are in politics, who cover politics in the media, as well as a sprinkling of scholars. We try to shed some light on what are the two really critical institutions in any democracy: voting elections on the one hand and representation on the other. IGS has always had a special focus on California, and this conference and these conferences reflect that. For 25 years, IGS has organized an event like this after each gubernatorial campaign. As you know, we bring together campaign officials, political consultants, journalists, scholars, and others to examine the most important elections in the nation's largest state. And this year, in recognition of the state's rapidly changing political landscape demographically and also institutionally in terms of the reforms that have taken place, we've expanded the conference beyond just the gubernatorial campaign. So we'll close the conference with a panel on the gubernatorial race, but over the next day and a half, we'll explore issues such as the state of two major parties, the growing importance of independent expenditure campaigns, the top two electoral system, and also look at some local issues that may grow in statewide importance, and finally the factors influencing the level of voter turnout, which reached an all-time low in the last election. During our lunch keynote session tomorrow, we'll welcome Amy Walter of the Cook Report, and she's going to give a national perspective looking ahead to 2016. Before thanking the people who've made this event possible, I'd like to just point out two related aspects of the IGS research agenda. First, as many of you know, later this year we'll publish a book which will be the edited transcript of this conference in book form. And that book will take its place along the 6 previous editions to form an ongoing record of California elections and the trajectory of politics here. We're also going to publish a special issue of our online journal. We have an e-journal founded 4 years ago, the California Journal of Politics and Policy. And this special issue will examine the top 2 electoral system. We've got 6 academic articles on the top 2, and then 5 or 6 comments from professionals like yourselves in this audience. And so we're now, I want to say that we're publishing the journal now on an open access platform. You don't have to pay to access it. And as of Monday, February 9th, through our IGS website, igs.berkeley.edu, you can log on and get to the issue. But anyone registered for the conference will get an email about the top 2 issue. Finally, I should note that we're videotaping this conference, and there'll be a webcast available on the IGS website probably in about a week. Okay, now to the thank yous, which are really important. An event of this size is impossible without the generous support of our sponsors, and I want to thank each of them. I think the names are there, but I want to read them out. ALZA Strategies, California Professional Fight Fighters, the Calkin Public Affairs, the Fiden's Group, Google, KP Public Affairs, Lucas Public Affairs, Nielsen Merksima, Pandora, Remco, Johnson and Purcell, Susie and Steve Swat, the Thomas Law Group, Wells Fargo and Company. In addition to those sponsors, I want to thank the people who organized the event. Several, in addition to Ethan Rarick, who of course has been the major domo of all of this, several members of the IGS National Advisory Council helped plan the conference. I want to thank Shouty Falamaki Phelps, Steve Lucas, Katie Merrill, whom I saw a minute ago, Karen Skelton, and Duff Sondheim. In addition to Ethan, who is the principal architect of the conference, Mark Levin, the associate director of the Institute, successfully found the sponsors that made the events possible. And from the staff, I want to thank Camille Cooey, who's sitting here in the front row, for her work on countless details related to the conference, and my own assistant, Catherine Nguyen, for her help today. And we have very fortunate to have an effective group of student volunteers. So the program gives the full details of the next 2 days, but we begin by looking at the state of the two major parties. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce the moderator of this panel, Amy Chance, who's the political editor of the Sacramento Bee. So Amy, I'm turning it over to you.
Good afternoon. Welcome. We're going to talk about the parties. We're going to talk about whether Republicans are viable. We're going to talk about whether Democrats have internal tensions. And I'm looking forward to great presentations from all of our panelists. I'll introduce them first. And I'd like to first introduce Ruben Barrales, who is president and CEO of GROWElect. He is representing the Republican point of view on the panel today, so please be kind to him.
Yes.
It is Berkeley, yeah. Sherry Bebitch Jeffe is a professor of the practice of public policy communication at USC, and she will be discussing lots to do with blathering. She'll be blathering. And Douglas Rivers is professor of political science at Stanford, but he's also chief scientist for YouGov Polimetrix, and I'm sure we'll be hearing something about metrics. Shawnda Wesley is executive director of the California Democratic Party.
I'll try to be nice to Ruben.
Thank you.
Great. So we're going to move down the panel. So we're going to have Ruben get started with his thoughts on the state of the parties in California right now.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving me a head start here. So this is California votes. I think the story out of 2014 was California votes, sort of. I mean, it was the lowest voter turnout, and obviously that influenced the election quite a bit. I think for Republicans, the good news is we're still standing, and we have the ability to fight another day. And within the Republican Party, that was a real challenge, and we had to reach some certain thresholds to provide hope for the party activists and folks who generally want to see Republicans be more competitive in California. I think one of the biggest benefits the party had going into the race or into 2014 was that Jim Brulte became chairman of the party in 2013. And Jim brings a lot of experience. He's smart and he's focused, and he sets realistic expectations in terms of where the party should go. So, he said very vocally that he wanted, the party was in debt when he took over. It was in debt, and it wasn't really focused on, I would say, effectively winning elections. And he's helped to change that around as far as the party is concerned, in terms of the party not being dependent on the top of the ticket, but actually being able to help to fund candidates or move money towards candidates as needed. Also, with a focus on grassroots and on finding candidates who reflect the communities more effectively. And I can go into more of that, but I think he's been able to lead the party as much as a chairman can lead a party in that direction. There were some missed opportunities for Republicans, obviously, in the congressional races, the targeted congressional races. Yes, that tide that swept across the U.S. ended pretty much at the Sierras. But, many of these races were pretty close, actually. Some of the targeted races, and surprisingly, some of the non-targeted races that were off of most everybody's radar ended up being very close. So, I think that does demonstrate that there is a possibility. If, quite frankly, some of our partners at the national level had focused more attention and resources on some of those races, we would have had a different outcome there for sure. Another missed opportunity, I think, was on the statewide level. Yes, it's difficult for a Republican to win a statewide race in California. But for the controller's race, Mayor Ashley Swearingen, and for the Secretary of State's race, Pete Peterson, got within single digits with really no money to speak of. And I think they both could have, again, in hindsight, with more resources, they could have been even more competitive and could potentially have won those races. But obviously, the outcome is the outcome. For Republicans, the good news is those incumbent Republicans who were targeted at the beginning of the cycle, like Denham and Valadao, Republicans, generally very Latino areas, Democratic districts, did very well in terms of winning re-election. I don't think either of them had a problem in the end. Republicans kept the Democrats in the legislature from a 2/3 majority in both the Assembly and the Senate. Republicans actually won a seat in the East Bay with Catherine Baker, who is a dynamic candidate and is turning into a dynamic assemblywoman as well. Also in the state Senate and state legislature, Andy Vidak was an uplifting victory. We'll take them wherever we can in California, in the Central Valley, in that special election that he won. And then there was some concern about holding on to that seat, which he did very strongly. Again, in a tough seat for Republicans, he did well. We had Janet Nguyen beating Joe Solorio for an open Senate seat. And I think, most important of all was that for the first time since 1994, Republicans defeated incumbent Democrats for legislative seats. Again, keeping the supermajority from being a reality for Democrats for now. And part of that story is an interesting dynamic, especially in Orange County and Southern California, is the swing of Asian voters towards Republicans, especially during this election cycle. Again, it was a low turnout, but Asian voters turned out more strongly for Republicans. And in the Orange County area and adjacent, you had Janet Nguyen, Young Kim, win legislative seats. Ling Ling Chang won Assembly seat. Michelle Steele won a Board of Supervisors seat. So did Lisa Parquette. And I'm forgetting the gentleman's name. The Orange County Clerk Recorder is an Asian Republican as well. You have a strong showing of Asian Republicans in the Orange County area. And, that provides some hope as well for Republicans who want to be more competitive in a more diverse state. I think I'll leave it at that. And
that's great. Can you say just a little bit more about statewide offices? Because I can remember after the Meg Whitman, Jerry Brown campaign, I can remember the Whitman team basically saying, and she had plenty of money, that California is just not a good field for someone to run for statewide office from the Republican Party anymore. What's your sense of that? That's true. There are certain dynamics, in California that make it difficult.
Don't say too much, or I won't have anything to say.
Okay. Well, that's
but I'm sorry, but I would say that Swearingen and Pete Peterson were great candidates.
They were great candidates, and that's what you need are great candidates. And I don't think the debate should even be, on the Republican side, whether it's got to be a moderate or it's got to be a conservative. It's got to be a great candidate, somebody who's compelling. And I think when you look at in states like California, and if you look in the Northeast, blue states where you have Republicans winning statewide offices, governorship, and all that, usually there's a compelling case that, in this case, the Republican is making. Often it's against the excesses of the Democratic majorities, some issues that come up in those states. And, I think you'll see those dynamics in California in the future as well.
Great. Okay, Sherry, we won't step on any more of your points.
I don't care. But Amy, before I begin, I'd like to just take a minute or two to say how much I will miss the contributions of Cal's Susan Rasky to this conference. Susan's cynicism about the world of politics and the world of government surpassed even mine, and that takes a lot, I have to say. So too did her enthusiasm and her optimism that these worlds can get better, and that we all, and our students out there in particular, could really be, must be a part of that change. I, for one, will miss that perspective, and I, for one, am glad that this conference goes on and that hopefully it will go on the way Susan would like it to go on. Mean, nasty, and happy.
That's nice.
Thank you. Now, okay, here.
Speaking of which.
Yes, never. Now, here are my short answers to the questions that were raised for us. Are Republicans viable in statewide elections? Not today, and maybe not in the foreseeable future. Can they appeal to a changing electorate? Not today, and maybe not in the foreseeable future. Are there going to be coming splits in the Democratic Party that could threaten its preeminence? They're not coming. They're here. Watch the intramural dynamics on the Democratic side of the race to replace Barbara Boxer. Watch the intra-party kabuki that will be done between the Democrats and the legislature and the governor, between more moderate Democrats, between more liberal Democrats, upcoming when the budget takes center stage. Are the demographic changes likely to make Democrats even more dominant than they are now? Never underestimate the ability of the California Democratic Party to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I've seen it so many times. As humorist Will Rogers once put it, I don't belong to any organized any organized party. I am a Democrat. Now, let me explain, let me expand. California has often been the great exception, and that's particularly true, and Ruben kind of alluded to this, in today's national political environment. I'm sorry to say, Ruben dear, but the Republicans appear to be on the brink of third-party status in this state. As you mentioned, the 2014 national Republican wave could not dent this state's deep blue armor. The November election, I agree, was not a total fiasco for the state Republicans. They were able to pick up enough legislative seats to deny Democrats that magic two-thirds majority in both the Assembly and the Senate. And Republicans didn't nominate a bunch of right-wing conservatives on their statewide slate. I think gubernatorial nominee Neil Kashkari is a social moderate, and he really was an energetic, enthusiastic candidate. And Fresno Mayor Ashley Swearingen, the controller nominee, has been dubbed a rising GOP star. I assume, I haven't heard that since the election, but watch her. She's still around. She's still mayor of Fresno. And of course, Pete Peterson. He's an independent-minded, good government type who landed newspaper endorsements up and down the state. That says something about a veritable unknown candidate. Now, what Ruben didn't exactly tell you was that both Swearingen and Peterson ran as far and as fast as they could away from their own party. But none of these candidates could overcome that big red R next to their name on the ballot. And as Ruben mentioned, Republicans did target a few California congressional districts, and in them they did field relatively strong candidates, but to no avail. In San Diego, openly gay Republican Carl DeMeo, who narrowly had lost the mayor's race to Democrat Bob Filner, the famous Bob Filner, who is no longer mayor of San Diego. And we'll talk a little about his replacements. Could not dislodge the Democratic incumbent, first term Scott Peters. In Sacramento, the former GOP Congressman Doug Ossie, a moderate, failed to unseat freshman Congressman Amy Barra in the nation's most expensive House race. Humongous amounts of outside money. In a district close to my home, which was split between Ventura and LA County, Democratic Congressman Julia Brownlee held off another moderate Republican, Assemblyman Jeffe, is it Correll or Correll?
Gorell.
An Iraq veteran, and he's been viewed as a real comer in GOP politics. The only congressional district that changed hands was the 31st CD in Riverside County. Redlands Mayor Pete Aguilar, a Democrat, won an open GOP seat that had been expected to go Democratic in 2012. But then, two really well-known GOP Congress members made it to the runoff, and I assume we'll talk a little bit more about that in the top two session. Why? Because, no offense, Shawnda, establishment Democrats were asleep at the wheel, hoarding their resources until the inevitable general election between Aguilar and some Republican. It didn't quite work out that way. These races were extremely close in districts where Republican registration was above the statewide average. Each had a significant percentage of NPP voters. In the general, Republicans did outperform their registration numbers, but in each case, the Democrat prevailed. Savvy Republicans, like Ruben, got it. He's already talked about what Jim Brulty has done for the party. He is recognized as the second most savvy Republican player in the state. But he's also been criticized for that 2014 strategy, which some Republicans say funneled resources into state legislative races, hurting GOP statewide and congressional candidates. Ruben was, I thought, quite polite when he sort of intimated that. Can Republicans make a comeback? Well, in this election, Obama melees and a lack of hotly contested race for governor appear to have dampened turnouts, particularly among Democrats and Latinos. But as these examples have shown, that slight turnout advantage for the GOP didn't really change the outcome of many races. Democrats have a really large registration pillow, if you will. Republican registration has dropped far more than Democratic registration in the last few years. The Democrats are still ahead. They're flat. The Republicans are going this way, and I expect we'll hear more about that. The real growth has been in unaffiliated voters. They amount for about 23% of the registered voters in California. In fact, their percentage as a part of the electorate has doubled since 1992. And they are trending younger and more Latino than the overall electorate. And unlike nationally, they do, in this state, tend to vote Democratic. They remain a very hard sell for Republicans. And I'm going to ignore that because I think your clock is wrong. But that, the NPP segment, is where the voter growth is. And that this segment is trending younger and more Latino, as is the state, can have significant implications for both major parties. And that's why I'm going to ignore it, because I need to talk about the Democrats. How many times have we heard, well, the continued growth of the Latino electorate is the biggest challenge for Republicans in California. For you young'uns, this all began, quite frankly, when California became ground zero for the alienation of Latinos, when then Governor Pete Wilson championed in 1994 Prop 187, a very strict a harsh initiative which denied illegal immigrants some education and health services. It was later overturned. But that ugliness really hasn't changed much. And this is important. The maneuvering of congressional Republicans on immigration has only intensified the Latino apathy toward the Republican Party. In fact, I think that the branding, the negative branding of the national Republican Party will likely be an albatross around the neck of California Republicans for some time in the future. And as Ruben alluded, the GOP has also been hindered by a fairly weak bench. No statewide Republican office holders, just a few prominent mayors, and I don't think that Representatives McCarthy or Darrell Issa, the most visible members of the California GOP Congressional Caucus, are going to participate in any kind of a suicide run for governor or Senate, at least not at this point. Since Boxer announced her retirement, the heavyweights that have been buzzed about are all Democrats.
I'd like to come back to that Senate race
Sure.
because I think that's a really great one to do.
Sure.
And we'll come back because I think you raised some points here that we really need to deal with. One
not
last
done.
point. One last point.
No. No. I want to remind those of us who are old enough to remember that there was a time when Republican moderates and relative centrists like Earl Warren and Richard Nixon, Richard Nixon was considered a moderate, were the heavy hitters. And Ronald Reagan, I don't think, could win the presidential nomination today. And Governor Reagan certainly would be middle of the road by today's national Republican standards. Well, those days are gone. The Republican brand is defined in Washington, where the conservative agenda is out of step with the California electorate. Californians are just not buying that GOP mantra, and it's hurting California Republicans. Nonetheless, and this is why I want to finish up, reports of the demise of the California Republican Party may well be premature. Democrats need to recall what can happen in a one-party state. A party is never more united than when it's out of power and fighting to get in. And it is never more divided when it's in power and fighting over the distribution of the spoils and power. And they need to remember, too, that demography alone isn't always destiny. Voter intensity, enthusiasm, turnout, candidates, campaigns, money play important roles, too. Now that I've met my 5-minute mark, thank you.
Douglas has some slides for us, so we'll be watching on the screen right here.
Well, I have to admire Sherry being able to go overtime talking about the prospects for Republicans in California. I didn't think I could come up with 15 minutes to say about that, so I'm going to talk about a different problem and attempt to be a little bit contrarian about turnout and its effects on this election. Turnout is, particularly for pollsters, an interesting problem that the Republican pollsters for Romney in 2012 missed badly based on some assumptions about what voter turnout would be. In 2014, nearly all the polls were about 2 points to Democratic, and it appears that the problem is related to turnout. And of course, nationally, the Democrats won a presidential election 2 years ago with considerably higher turnout than in the midterm. And the assumption, at least a lot of people's assumption, is that those voters didn't turn out, and that explains the shift from 2012 to 2014. So first, at the national level, if you look at congressional vote in 2012, that's a horizontal axis. The vertical axis is 2014. Each point is one of the congressional districts where there was an election. These guys here and here, up there, are races that were uncontested in either 2012 or 2014. But the bulk of it, you see there's a very close relationship between the vote for the Democratic candidate in 2012 and in 2014. The main thing that changed is that the bulk of the districts are below the 45-degree line. If a point is on that line, it means the Democrats got exactly the same share of vote in 2012 and 2014. And the bulk of the points are below that, saying the Democrats did worse. Hopefully that's not news. If you look at California, it's pretty much the same picture. You've got a scattering of uncontested races around the corners, and then the points are pretty much near the 45-degree line, but they're a little lower, meaning that Democrats underperformed in 2014 relative to 2012. Of course, nationally, the Republicans managed to pick up 13 seats. In California, they managed to lose one. That's that pink dot over on the left, which is the San Bernardino seat that Sherry mentioned, where the Democratic candidate finished third in 2012, and then the Republican incumbent retired. Anyhow, enough about that. But if you go back to the national picture, the blue dots are Democrats won those seats in both 2012 and 2014. The red dots are the ones that the Republicans won in both years. The green, these guys right here, are the ones that shifted between from Democratic to Republican between 2012 and 2014. And then there were, I don't know, I think there are 3 or 4 seats where they shifted the other direction. Not many of those. California, of course, doesn't have any green dots. There's no Republican pickups. Okay, so what explains this? Is it really a function of turnout? If it is, then most Democrats think, well, just wait till 2016, we can pick those back up. Looking at some polling data, so in 2014, YouGov, and in particular me, was involved in polling for CBS News and the New York Times. We polled all 435 congressional races. So we have data on every single race. So one of the things we were measuring as we went was enthusiasm. So we asked people, were they enthusiastic about voting in these elections? Most people weren't terribly enthusiastic, but there was a pretty large enthusiasm gap at the national level, with Republicans here having a 15-point advantage in terms of being very enthusiastic. In California, that advantage was 11 points, so considerably smaller. Okay. Now it turns out, of course, Republicans have an enthusiasm advantage in every midterm election that I've seen data. It was smaller in California, so was California somehow different? Well, when we look at vote switching, we see at the national level, this is our final wave survey. So among Democrats, 76% who said they voted for Democratic candidates in 2012 said they were voting for Democratic congressional candidates in 2014, 8% Republicans. The rest are undecided or said they weren't going to vote. On the Republican side, it was 81-7, so there's an advantage here for the Republicans. That is, they're gaining about 5 points in terms of vote switching at the national level. In California, it's actually the opposite. Okay, that is, the vote switching, such as it was, benefited the Democrats, not the Republicans. Okay, so there's clearly a difference there. If we look at the effects of turnout, so this is at the national level. Again, every point is a congressional district. On the horizontal axis, we've got the change in turnout between 2012 and 2014. So 0 would be a district that had the same turnout in 2014 as 2012. That basically doesn't happen. And then there are ones that have various decreases in turnout, which lead to the overall national decrease. And then the vertical axis here is the change in the Democratic vote share. So one story is Democrats didn't turn out, they didn't vote, and so what happened was and Republicans did turn out, and that explains the vote shift. And what you notice here, if you look at these, the red dots, where the turnout doesn't decline a lot, the Republicans actually tend to win these districts. And the blue dots go the other way. Where the turnout's relatively high, we don't have a lot of Democratic wins. But all the switches are really in the middle here. I was sort of puzzling this, so I'll come back to that in a second. Here's what California looks like. And it's pretty much the same picture. It's a little harder to see, but the red dots sort of tend to go up to the northeast and the blue dots to the southwest. So I wonder what in the world's going on here? Was there a turnout effect? There's quite a bit of variation in turnout across the state, and there was nationally. And so I looked at which districts were contested in both years. So the solid dots are ones that were contested in both 2012 and 2014, and the open dots are the ones that weren't contested. Basically, all this turnout variation is occurring in places where you're not having contested races. If you look at contested races, it turns out there's no difference in the change in the vote from 2012 to 2014 based on the level of turnout. And the exact same story turns out to be true nationally. A little harder to see because there are a lot more districts. But basically, all these things in here and down here are races where one party didn't contest in one of the years. If you look at the races that are contested in both years, it's absolutely flat. That is, the story of this election was not turnout. All the shifts occur in the sort of middle range here. They don't occur in places where turnout either increased a lot or was relatively high or relatively low. And this is a basic story. I know on the weekend before the election, when you're in the TV studios and so forth, you're not generally allowed to talk about polling. So what you talk about is turnout. And there's always the hope that there's going to be some massive turnout change. And one of the things that is guaranteed on turnout is group level turnout among registered voters hardly changes at all. That is, all groups go up and down at about the same rate. There are high turnout elections, like, for example, 2008. There are low turnout elections, like most midterms and so forth. But turns out the percentage of each group that is in the electorate hardly changes. And so I guess the point I would leave you here is that turnout is unlikely to be the key to understanding how the parties are going to change in terms of their relative strengths or weaknesses. What we had in 2014 in the rest of the country, particularly in the places where there were competitive Senate races and governor's races, not like California, is essentially a vote shift of 3 or 4 points from 2012 to 2014. In places like California, there wasn't a vote shift. That's why you didn't see much of anything, but it certainly wasn't a turnout story. Thank you.
Fascinating. I have one question that's immediate I have to ask, which is I watch candidates, governors do a lot of planning around turnout. Jerry Brown moved all the initiatives to November because of turnout. We have candidates right now for the Senate race who are trying to calculate which year they might better run for election based on turnout. So how does that fit with your findings here?
Well, there is a small Republican net advantage in midterm elections than presidential,
Okay.
But it's on the order of a couple points. And you can't change a midterm election. So, if you look over the last half dozen midterms, you'll see the Republican share of the electorate being on the order of a couple points higher in the midterm.
Only a couple points.
But that was so important in this set of elections. A couple of points is enough votes to switch an election. I mean, don't dismiss a couple of votes.
Well, it's the same pattern in every midterm. So
I don't care. That's not what I'm talking about.
Okay, we'll continue that argument after Shawnda's presentation.
Jeez,
I brought a timer. I plan the podium agendas for a state convention, and so I'm trying to lead by example. All right. Hi, I'm Shawnda Wesley. I'm the Executive Director of the California Democratic Party. First, as a UC Berkeley alumni, and as a woman working in the business of politics, I wanted to thank the organizers for including a fair amount of women in this proceeding. Many times, women in the business of politics are known as the workhorses and not the show ponies. So what we do may not be as headline grabbing at the party as an opinionated pundit from 30,000 feet up, armchair quarterbacking what we did and did not do right. But what parties do makes a difference, both the Republican Party with Cynthia Bryant at its helm and our team. And I also want to thank specifically Katie Merrill for all of her work in getting such a great, diverse lineup. So what does the party do? Oh, wait, we have a few questions on the agenda. My answers are no, 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 and yes. But we're going to have plenty of time to get into that. Since I have a captive audience right now, what I thought I would do is actually tell you what we do. Because there are a lot of misconceptions, even in this room, about what the party is supposed to be doing. I used to say, what the heck do they do anyway, before I worked for them, and then I learned. Our success is not a happy accident. It's hard work. It is not very sexy to say that, but that's exactly what it is. A lot of people say California is a blue state, so of course you won, but that's not all the case, as Cynthia can tell you, in traditionally Republican areas, Orange County, Central Valley, Inland Empire, and others. Here's something we do. Targeted voter turnout. Yes, we've got a $2 million voter statewide advantage, and the Democratic brand is in strong shape with core Democrats. And our demographic advantage will continue to grow, but it was a tough year. And so, let's see, unless you were a victim of medical malpractice or you were a doctor, you probably didn't vote. Our credit rating is up, unemployment numbers are going down, people were pleasantly happy with Jerry Brown. So why do I, if I have 2 jobs, I'm worried about childcare, why am I showing up to vote if things are going pretty good? So of course, we had work to do with the state party. The party invested in paid and volunteer ground crews and in key races, and where we had a full complement of volunteer and paid crews, we actually increased the turnout nearly 4% higher than the rest of the state. Now, if you look at the races I'm talking about, the average win margin was 3.82%. So what we did made a difference. And when I got to tell the staff that, we were all very relieved and felt like what we did really did matter. I love getting the question, what's your message to get people out to vote? What are you going to do to inspire people? That's asked by people who don't understand field and don't understand what happens in these very tight races. This is about pure and utter organization, especially in a midterm year. Now, keep in mind that we were expected to lose seats even in the congressional delegation, and we picked up 1. Now, Sherry, you kind of scare me a little bit. Just a little bit? Yeah, okay. I think with good reason. But I do have to say something about Congressional District 31. Pete Aguilar, a great candidate in 2012. 96% of the endorsed Democrats made it out of the primary in 2014. 96% of our endorsed Democrats made it out of the primary in 2014. Pete Aguilar did not have the endorsement of the party in 2012. And that was because of a misstep of his campaign team. Now, had they gone out and gotten that endorsement, the CDP could have invested time and resources like we did in Barra, Brownlee, Lowenthal, Ruiz, Takano, and Peters. We did in Costa as well. So that was what happened for the real story on CD31. We were kept out of that in the primary. So let's talk about targeted voter expansion programs. That's the other thing that the party focuses on. I think everyone here knows that one of the things we do is try to expand the base. And right now, the Bay Area counties are more, ultimately more influential statewide than LA County. And this is because of a problem in LA County where they don't have enough Democrats registered as permanent vote-by-mail voters. So the Democrats turn out in force in the Bay Area, but not so much in LA. In the state, 48% of Democrats are PVBM, permanent vote-by-mail, and in LA, it's only 30%. So we invested time and resources in Operation Game Changer, where we converted 50,000 Democrats to vote by mail. Then we went in 2012 and tried to figure out if it worked, and it did. Our folks turned out at 79%, and the same universe, voting universe of Democrats who were not part of our program turned out at 67%. That's something that the state party does. Due to McCain-Feingold restrictions, though, the problem here is that we have to spend mostly federal money for a program like this. If I'm going to tell someone in their polling place, if I'm going to tell them the election date, we have to use federal funding. If we register voters, if we convert them to vote by mail, we have to use federal funding. It's something Cynthia and I and Brulte and Burton plan to talk about and work on to help change that problem that we have. Another thing we do is we make life a little harder for Republicans. Not that it's not tough enough, Ruben. But our governor, as you know, is as frugal with the state budget as he is with his own campaign account. So what the party did is we worked with him and tried to get him some kind of early front-runner status that he may or may not have been perceived to have already. But one of the things we did is we dogged Abel Maldonado all around the state to public events to highlight his early missteps. We kept the focus on the GOP primary fight with fightontheright.com effort. And that was pitting, of course, Wall Street Neil Kashkari versus Tea Party Tim Donnelly. And in the House races, we counterbranded Republican congressional candidates through the CDP's Wrong for California effort, showing them their out-of-touch positions on key issues to Californians. And then, of course, we assisted Brown by raising as much money as we could to help his race so he could focus on Props 1 and 2, which are good for California. Just so you know, when I talked about hard work, I'm not kidding. 77 offices, 243 staff, 556 canvassers, nearly 6 million knocks and dials of real voters. Our Protect the Vote program, 312 mailers to 60 million homes, 1 million piece official Democratic slate card, and also 1.3 million door hangers volunteer distributed around the state by Democratic volunteers. What are our advantages? Those organizing and election programs, the hard work I'm talking about. Our registration, of course, 48, 28, and then 23 for DTSs. And we have a stronger strength of affiliation. Republicans go deeper also, but not wider in their electoral success. We are big tent on issues. We go moderate, we go liberal. Our folks in the districts make up the decision on who we're going to endorse. So all politics are local. That's why you have Rudy Salas and Tom Amiano in the same party working side by side. The Republican Party, that's one of our advantages too. Now, except for Anthony Cannella, because he has to have Thanksgiving dinner with his dad, you're looking at a Republican Party of Tim Donnelly. So, keep up the good work. And then, of course, the national trend. There is a blue wall in presidential politics. There's a great conservative Republican blogger named Chris Ladd who did an op-ed piece for the Houston Chronicle that actually looked at the electoral vote. And right now, any Democratic candidate who's somewhat serious has a lock on 257 of the 270 votes. So for the Republicans to be able to swing a presidential election in the coming years, they would have to do something no one's heard of, and that's get just about every single swing seat on their side, plus one possible additional Democratic seat in order to win the presidential nomination. And then, of course, there's decline to state voters. More independents like us. A PPIC poll from August talked about this. Only 33% of independents say they are conservative, and they identify with us on issues like marriage equality, gun control, choice, climate change, immigration reform, taxes on the wealthy, and more. Of course, these are actually all liberal ideas, Democratic ideas and liberal ideas. And that's why we consistently continue to have success with decline to state voters. And that is all, and I made it under time, did I not? Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Shawnda, to the question of turnout in Los Angeles and the vote by mail program, you're just in the early stages of that, as I understand it. Is that right? Where you have potential for growth, in other words, to register many more Democrats.
There's another 430,000 or so Democrats who could feasibly be converted, who are occasional voting Democrats who could be converted to vote by mail, permanent vote by mail, that could have a significant impact on a statewide election.
So to the question of whether Democrats are just on a demographic roll that will continue into the future, assuming the party is also effective in doing what it wants to do on vote by mail, is it your view you're going to have a lock forever?
I sure hope so. It certainly trends that way, but the reason why it trends that way isn't just because of our party, but it is because of our appeal to decline to state voters. Until those decline to state voters, are anti-gun control, anti-choice, anti-immigration reform, we are going to be their party. Our brand works with them. So it is that group of voters that is the swing for us, in addition to our large numbers of Democrats who we have to yank out to vote.
Great. So Ruben, you're trying to grow candidates.
Right.
So talk to me about how you find candidates. Is this a long-term strategy? And if it is, how will it take 2 decades? Talk to me about how you do it.
Sure. So the one thing I think I need to emphasize is that I think the reason Republicans beat incumbent Democrats for the first time since 1994 is because we had better candidates in those races. Obviously, both sides were well funded. We just had stronger candidates, and it speaks to the need for candidate recruitment. Today, the majority of local elected officials are Republican in California. So, we are working on developing a farm team. And GROWElect itself, focused on Hispanic Republicans, Latinos, and helping them get elected to local offices and creating a farm team. But, I don't know, since I've been doing this endeavor of finding candidates and all, I realize why it's not done on a systematic basis, because it's really hard to do. You've got to find people that are in a position where they're enthusiastic about running, being in public life, going through a campaign, putting themselves and their families through that, and in some cases, having the resources to be able to do that. So, you've really got to search long and hard to find these folks. Fortunately, in this cycle, we've been able to do that. And I think victory begets victory, and if we're able to do more of that, you'll see more successes on the Republican side.
On the question of diversity, you elected to the legislature, I think it was 3 women, a Korean American woman, Vietnamese American, Chinese American woman. Are you seeing crossover voting by party based on their ethnicity?
We saw nationally, I don't have the state numbers, but nationally there was a shift, as I mentioned before, in the Asian voters for Republicans. There was a swing, an increase in the Asian vote for Republican candidates. So, and it manifests itself in California with the election of those new legislators plus others. You saw, even in San Diego at the local level, talk about developing candidates. Chris Cate, a young Republican, Asian, won a seat on the city council in San Diego, which is a big deal down in San Diego area. So, we don't believe that demography is destiny. There are a lot of other factors involved, and part of that is developing a strong farm team.
And how much of that is a matter of socioeconomic levels? Is because Asian Americans tend to be a bit more moderate, a bit more well-off than other ethnic groups, and then maybe more amenable to the fiscal policies of Republicans? I just feel uncomfortable when anybody says, well, we got more of this or more of that. Well, maybe you did, but it goes beyond gender and it goes beyond race.
Mm-hmm. But, you've got to break it down one way or another, right? I don't know why.
I know, and it drives me nuts.
Sherry, I do want
an interesting point about the API voting universe, and that is the fact that Imprinted Communications did a great study recently, and it talked about the environment. You saw and 83% of API voters were concerned about climate change. Mm-hmm. So while we hold about a 45% registration for APIs versus I think about 28% for Republicans, they are concerned about the same things we're concerned about, which is the economy and healthcare and the environment. And I think specifically on the climate change issue, they actually had a larger percentage of their community who was concerned about, who actually called themselves environmentalists than Californians as a whole. So we think the Republican Party brand isn't going to work for them over the time until the climate change denier element leaves the party.
Well, I think it partly depends on how it manifests itself in terms of, climate change is a big issue. It's a worldwide issue, right? But how it manifests itself in terms of people's lives, taxes that they have to pay, and the like, and if people get frustrated with the policies that come out of Sacramento to supposedly address climate change.
And they were one of the governor's strongest bases on Prop 30 as well.
Does the Republican Party need to change some of its positions nationally before California Republicans have a chance?
Yep.
Thank you, Professor.
Anytime.
Yeah. Well, California is a bellwether for the rest of the country. The challenge is that most members of Congress who are Republican are in relatively safe seats, and they're not as diverse as many of the seats are. You see the California Republicans in Congress in diverse seats like Denham and Valadao, and you see legislators like Andy Vidak. I don't know if you'd say they're a different kind of Republican, but they're connecting with their voters. And isn't that the key to being successful?
Sherry, I want to hear you more talk about the tensions in the, on that point.
One point on this. So the California Republican base is both small, but it actually isn't all that far from the national Republican base. So there's a fundamental problem that Republican voters in California are pretty conservative in a state that's overwhelmingly liberal.
I think that's pretty much a generalization because everything is changing now. We've got the top two primary, and we've got a redistricting function that is in the hand of a so-called independent citizens commission. And in that way, we're different from almost every other state in the union. So comparisons don't really work anymore.
Well, the blanket primary can be good for Republicans in California because it means that they don't have to play so much to the base. But it's also a risk where you end up as a third party.
Well, we'll come back to the Republican problems, but I do want to hear Sherry elaborate a little bit on the tensions in the Democratic Party that are playing out right now in the jockeying for who might run for Barbara Boxer's seat.
The main players, obviously, are in this are the one declared candidate within the Democratic Party for the Boxer seat, and I am going to predict that Kamala Harris is the front runner among all declared Democratic candidates for the Senate. I'm really sort of tired of everybody playing the horse race when there's only one horse in the race right now. And down south, the speculation is, and I can't even guess, but I sense that Villaraigosa, the former mayor of Los Angeles, the former Speaker of the Assembly, Antonio Villaraigosa, is moving closer to declaring for the Senate. So you have North and South, whether or not that tension is real. The perception is that tension is real.
So
The
geographic
fact,
tension.
yes, which is, I'm not at all sure it exists so much anymore. I saw one study which tended to indicate that these days it's more San Francisco and LA, the heart of the Democratic constituency, against the whole rest of the state. It's not even West versus East anymore. I don't know, it sounded a little flaky to me, but anyway, you've got the geographic tension. You have two former speakers of the California Assembly, one from the North, Willie Brown, one from the South, Herb Weston, both of whom are African American, supporting Kamala Harris, even against a former Assembly Speaker, even though Willie Brown has referred to Antonio Villaraigosa as just like a son to me, which makes me a little nervous. I am a little frightened. On many levels, you're right. On many levels. I am hoping, not only for the sake of the Democratic Party, but for the sake of the state of California, that we don't see that tension within the Democratic Party begin to break down ethnically, if you will. There is also the tension between mostly Southern Californian Democratic leaders, most of whom are Latino, and Washington, D.C. Democrats, like Cory Booker, like Elizabeth Warren, like Kirsten Gillibrand, all of whom have endorsed Kamala Harris. And there is a resentment among certain sections of the party, again, most particularly, I think, in the South, or maybe they're just more vocal than the North, that Washington is attempting to anoint the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. I don't think it bodes well. I don't think it bodes well for the party. I don't think it bodes well for the state. I don't know what you do about it. It's the way politics goes these days.
Oh,
Shawnda.
I'd love to comment on that.
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, I love this theory of a conspiracy, an anointment. I know it's not yours. Someone's communication shop is clearly working overtime, and someone should be getting overtime pay. So, from my vantage point, I'm looking at a statewide elected official who has a strong electoral record, winning statewide the last 2 election cycles, who has a national donor network, and who is the only declared candidate, and who is announcing endorsements that she has received. That is not a conspiracy. That is called effective campaigning. But I guess we only call it that when a man does it. Anyway. Oh, yeah. Oh, you heard me. So let me go to the party. As my chairman has said many times in the 7 years I work for him, you cannot do 2 things. You can't tell someone who to marry, and you can't tell someone when to run. So if you look at the former mayor and our current attorney general, and they both had roles at the Democratic National Convention in 2012. They both have their own DC contacts, and by the amount of phone calls that the former mayor is making, and as long as his team is working as hard as the Attorney General's team, I assume that when or if he announces, he will have plenty of endorsements of his own. And as far as the Democratic Party is concerned, our endorsement is made up of 3,381 delegates, some of whom are in the audience. They will make that decision on who the party endorses in February of 2016, and we will not make a decision sooner than that. Go ahead.
I'm just astounded. I think he just endorsed Kamala Harris. I don't have a horse in this race, and I'm
not saying it's you. You heard me, communication shops.
Well,
other folks want to create this narrative that does not exist.
That is part of the answer to Amy's question.
Well, and
I just hate to see the Democrats being perceived as, giving a slight to Latinos in California. I mean, it just really... I don't think it's healthy either.
You're so sensitive, Ruben.
Especially since your party
party is so good on immigration reform and the DREAM Act and education and all those things. I know it just tears you up.
Yeah, just one more thing that I found very interesting. This past week, the White House had you may have been on the call, a regional call to regional reporters, and somehow I get the press releases, and when I care about it, I tune in to see what questions are being asked. And it was a defense of the president's executive orders on immigration. And the only California elected official on that call was Kamala Harris. I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, let me ask you this, Ruben. Does it matter if Republicans are having a little tension over who they're going to run when we really haven't had any Republicans step forward, and I'm not seeing money for a massive Senate race, Republican race by a Republican.
Well, that's the challenge. That's the challenge for a Republican. Well, it's a challenge for anyone who's going to run, statewide, is to, be able to raise something close to $20 million. So that's a big hurdle for just about anybody. So I don't know who might emerge on the Republican side, but I think that the Republicans will be competitive at a statewide level. I'm just not sure when.
You didn't answer my time window question before. So are you thinking these legislative candidates have to serve a full term, 12 years or whatever in the legislature, and then move forward into statewide office from there?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, there are some notable exceptions, but generally speaking, my sense is Californians tend to prefer somebody who's had some electoral experience before they elect them statewide. So on both sides of the aisle, actually. So yeah, I think generally you find folks that have or are serving at a local or state level, the legislature, for example, who become viable candidates for statewide. There are exceptions, but I think that it's a path that most of elected officials take.
So 10, 20 years?
Oh, I don't know. I can't predict it. Who would have predicted Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Or Barack Obama.
Or for that matter, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there are different dynamics, but
Came up through the legislature, though.
yeah. Well, yeah. No, that
That's
was the
the
exception.
point.
That was the
That's the
exception.
point.
Yeah. But yeah. Again, what we've seen in the Northeast or other very blue states are policies, Democratic policies that, or sometimes scandal, that highlights an interesting individual like a Chris Christie or in New York, Rudy Giuliani, and others, who then are able to win as Republicans in very Democratic states. So, I don't know what the situation is going to look like in California and when that will be, but I'm sure we'll see that come to pass as well.
Mm-hmm. Can you, Professor Rivers, give us shed any more light on the fact that the congressional wave or the national wave just stopped at the California borders in the congressional races?
Well, first,
If it wasn't turnout, what was it?
there was a small pickup for Republicans relative to how they did in 2012. So it's not like it absolutely stopped. It's just you're dealing with a state that's so overwhelmingly Democratic that had an uncompetitive governor's race. There wasn't a whole lot of room for that. The national wave was heavily driven by the map that was relatively conservative states. And so we wouldn't expect that to apply in California.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was curious to know, Doug, if you took into consideration in your matrix the vote by mail in your turnout consideration, your computation, because it's a significant percentage. Were you up there just talking about ballot box voting, or did you factor in the vote by mail?
No, it's all vote, and
Well, yes,
so
you did?
yes, so the proportion of people who vote by mail, permanent absentee, early voting, and so forth has gone up nationwide. The overall effect on turnout has been negligible. We've been expecting that, making it easier would lead to increases in turnout, and the differences seem to have been small or short-lived at best. A lot of the variation that we see in turnout, like between a midterm and a general, has to do with the makeup of the districts. There are structural characteristics that the Republican districts tend to be a little more competitive, and so they have higher turnouts in midterms. The lowest turnout occurs in places where you don't have elections. And a lot of what we see in midterms is we don't really have elections in large parts of the country in a midterm year.
Shawnda, I want to put the same question to you, and I want to kind of start getting to money. So is it that California is just terrible territory in the congressional races, or is it just that the national Republicans didn't put their money here?
Well, if you ask some Republican activists, they'd probably say they're pretty upset that the Republicans didn't prioritize California, which is interesting coming from Kevin McCarthy's home state, that more money didn't come from the national Republicans here in California. But for us, it really is, just going back to what I said before, it really was the hard work. Yes, we spent a lot of money. That's the nature of campaigns. But when push comes to shove, it was the 6 million knocks and dials that we did to average voters to get them out. No amount of television ads and mail was going to get those folks to the polling place. For Republicans, they don't have to worry about that. They start with a natural advantage. So they just needed a little boost from their national party. So it would be great to see them play here in 2016. Instead of, putting all that money into maybe the presidential campaign.
I'm taking notes.
Take notes. Get back to your leader.
Encouraging them to put the money in. That can't be a good sign. Ruben, what would you say about the national money?
I don't feel like we've started with an advantage being a Republican in California. Well, in hindsight.
It would be a drop in the well if he did, and you know it.
In hindsight, it was clear which races more money should have been spent on and all. But, there are limited resources. And I do want to get back to, Brulte made it really clear what he wanted to accomplish. And basically, we were able to do it. We were competitive in the races. They broke the way we wouldn't want them to break in those races. But, the legislative victories, the prohibiting the 2/3 majority, supporting now a majority of Republicans in local elected offices, given the limited resources that the party had. I think all things considered, Republicans did pretty well in 2014 in California. And the only way, as Brulte has said himself, the only way we're going to be able to remain relevant and to grow is from the grassroots. And I think you're going to see more attention there in terms of recruitment of identification, recruitment of candidates.
So where are the Republican donors in all of this? Nobody tied their hands and said, don't give money to Swearingen or Pete Peterson or those kinds of candidates. So are donors just saying we're going to sit on the sidelines until we see some
Well, I think donors want
better candidate development and more time?
Well, I think that they want to have hope. They want it's pretty clear what's the situation in California. So I think I think the enthusiasm is much higher today than it was a year ago in California with the donor communities and with the 2016 elections coming up. There is more enthusiasm now. Again, it was a critical year for Republicans, 2014. If we didn't get the victories that we got, it would have been a pretty depressing situation, I think. But again.
Sherry, one more point, and then we're going to go to the audience for questions.
Here's what I think about that. I think that Republican donors, by and large, now are focusing more on policy, on initiatives that they care about, initiatives that they support. I think that this vaunted $900 million that the Koch brothers are going to spend, if any comes to California, it will come based on their policy preferences and what they want to see achieved, and not necessarily on candidates, because if they can't elect the candidates who carry their policies, they can change the policies through the initiative process.
Great. All right, we're going to have microphones come around to answer questions. I have one in the front right here. 2, 3 in the front. The front people have lots of questions.
That's why they're in the front.
That's right.
Hi, I'm Bob Stern. Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. Doug, I'm a little confused, and I figure if I'm confused, a few other people are confused too. You indicated that the Republicans did not win because of turnout. If the turnout had been the same as in 2012, would the Republicans have won as many congressional seats?
The problem with that hypothetical is there never has been 60% turnout in a midterm election, and there are reasons for that. Within the range of what we see, turnout does not explain the year-to-year variations in the election outcome. Republicans won a majority of the House seats in 2012 with what the 2012 turnout was. So if that's the hypothetical, yeah, they would have won a majority. Yeah, and they may hold those in 2016. I think it's probably going to be tough because the national tide's probably going to go the other direction. But that is people switching how they vote.
Nancy Bickle, League of Women Voters. Here in Alameda County, we're beginning to wonder whether the turnout figures are artificially low because there's no purging going on. And we want to know, we're wondering, used to purge too much, now what's happening? To what extent are people who have no longer living addresses removed?
So the turnout I'm referring to is a voting eligible population, not of registered voters. Getting a fix on what registered voter turnout is difficult because we don't know how much is deadwood, how much is people who've moved or registered multiple times and so forth. But I don't think the purging has been notoriously inefficient. It leads to bad turnout numbers, but it doesn't actually lead to fewer votes.
But the eligible voter turnout was low in 2014 as well, right?
Right. But that's, in California in particular, it's due to the fact that we didn't have a competitive statewide race.
Let's see where we got to go. Maybe just that second row there. Starting to get questions in here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, C.T. Weber. I came down from Sacramento. One of the things that I think that we really haven't touched too much on is that there's been a lot of Supreme Court decisions that's really opened up the pump as far as money. And I'm just wondering what people think that the effect if the Koch brothers dropping their $850 million into a number of California races is going to have a great deal of effect or not.
If I jump in? This is all about citizen disenfranchisement because no one's going to call up the Koch brothers and say, hey, can I go walk a precinct for my favorite candidate? They're going to call their local party, most likely, to do that. And the problem is a lot of our county committees will tell you is that the McCain-Feingold restrictions are so onerous that even though they want to do the right thing, it's impossible to try to figure out the actual law. I have a binder 4 inches thick that I have to use. I'm sure Cynthia could agree with me on this. 4 inches thick in order to just do a get out the vote program. If I am planning a precinct walk, it is a different disclaimer, different content, 1 or more of 4 different types of money, just in that piece alone, depending on whether a candidate campaign is walking it, a CDP campaign is walking it, a paid canvasser is walking it, or a volunteer is walking it. It's ridiculous because we don't probably do as much voter registration as we used to because we used to be able to do that with soft money. Now it's hard money. And it is really unfair for the independent expenditure committees who are not accountable to the public to continue to do what they're doing without trying to give the public access to the same kind of political resources through their local party. Campaign finance advocates?
There's a lot of, there's a lot of focus on the Koch brothers, Koch money, but I don't know, you're the professor. I mean, unions and others on the Democrat
at
side
that scale.
spend
Not on that scale.
spend a lot of money as well. I don't think, there's a lack of resources
And
on
different
for Democrats.
paths, if you will.
Yeah. But, I think Democrats have done a pretty good job of raising and spending money in California. Thank you. Yes. And, but, again, we were still able to defeat, some legislators for the first time since 1994. I don't know if I mentioned that before.
No.
But,
Really?
Yeah.
That was the year I started in politics.
Oh, stop it.
It was.
Was the year of Prop 187?
It was the year, that's why I decided to continue in politics.
In the front row here,
Over there.
Carol, there's a gentleman in the blue shirt.
Now, the Koch brothers, here's what is happening now, and I don't think it helps either party. The Koch brothers are now their own primary, and they are their own political party. And because of the way their PACs, their groups are structured, there will come a time, if it hasn't come already, when candidates will have absolutely no say over their own campaign, over their own agenda, over their own messages, because $900 million are spent without any of their oversight.
Yeah, I'm seeing nods up here.
And if you indulge me, in 1994, we lost about 5 statewide seats, and the speakership of the Assembly was in jeopardy for Democrats for 3 years. I think we're okay now.
You guys have almost answered my question already. I'm Carol Wills with the firefighters. The question I have, though, is it's not just the money that these extramural groups are starting to suggest that they can pour in. And if you have $900 million, you can pour money down every rat hole you possibly can imagine. But they're also building their own organizational structures. They're building their own ground games. They're building these things that may be used for initiatives in California, but ultimately could redound to the benefit of the party. And they're really kind of the elephant in the room. And really, it is an elephant, by and large, with all due respect. So I guess my question maybe is directed at Shawnda, which is, are the Democrats at all concerned that this extra party organizational structure might reduce that organizational gap that the Democrats seem to have had so far?
No, I think that what you're talking about is more temporary and more paid staff versus volunteer armies and infrastructure. The party will always have the infrastructure to reach out to all 58 counties, and people care about what we do. They're members of the organization in a volunteer capacity. The county committee chairs who I know, I am still just amazed that they're able to spend so much of their free time when they actually have a life and a family and a job. That's not the same thing as a Koch brothers independent expenditure. Those will come and go, and there'll be paid programs. I wish I had it with me, but I actually studied on my first campaign. I looked at all of the houses the candidate went to, all of the houses the paid crews went to, and all of the houses that the volunteers went to, and I wanted to see what the breakdown of ID'd yeses were. The highest was the candidate, but almost exactly the same level were volunteers, and then there was a drop off on the paid. So we're more influential at the door as well.
Again, I don't have the facts, but I just know that I help get candidates elected, and I know that generally the Democrats are spending as much money as the Republicans are spending to get elected and to defeat their opposing candidates. So I don't think it's an issue that somehow the Republicans are flooding the state with money. I see the flood of money coming from both sides. So I wouldn't worry about it if I were
It didn't work for Meg Whitman.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to, again, better candidates. I mean, that's a big part of it. That's a really important part about it. And yeah, what are they saying? What do they want to do? And do they connect with the voters? I mean, in the end, yeah, money matters a lot. But, I'm a Republican in California. I see where the resources are, and they are not with the Republicans in California. The Democrats are in control. The Democrats have the money.
Let's go to the back. There's a gentleman with his hand up on this side. Yeah.
Hi, my name is David. I'm not affiliated with anybody. Just as a citizen curious about what the experts on the panel would say, what about redistricting? We're having a new redistricting regimen coming in after the next census. Do one of the parties or the other like it more or less, which will give me a sense of who will benefit, I guess. What do we think? Is it just going to stir the pot? Is it going to create some more competitive races, which we could sorely need here in the state? What's our thought on redistricting?
That's a big if right now. There is a case before the U.S. Supreme Court in which our Republican Arizona legislators are challenging their Citizens Redistricting Commission redistricting of the state because it's Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, the election clause, says that the manner, place, and times of of elections for the Senate and the House of Representatives lie with the legislature. And the definition of the legislature that they use is a very narrow one. It's the Republican-dominated legislature of the state of Arizona. Amicus briefs have been filed by several individuals and groups in California. I think probably Bob Stern ought to chime in on this one. And it is interesting that 3 former governors, Schwarzenegger, Duke-Majan, and Wilson, have come down on the side of the Citizens Commission. The only former governor who hasn't signed that brief is Democrat Gray Davis. Till that is settled, and there is somewhere, Joel Fox is down there at Fox and Hands has also written about this. Until that case is settled, there is worry among some segments, political segments on both sides in this state, that we won't know exactly what it will look like, and that if indeed the definitive legislature becomes whoever is the law-making power, whether it's the institutional legislature or the people acting as a legislature through the initiative process, may well send us down a slippery slope wherein any initiative might not be upheld. It's not an easy question. Bob,
if I can just translate a little bit for the unaffiliated in the room, what Sherry's talking about is we have a Citizens Redistricting Commission here in California, and what she's really saying is that Republicans would prefer to use that, I assume because the Democrats control the legislature. Exactly. And so what the question is if we have the Redistricting Commission, does it benefit Republicans more? And under the current system, do they have any hope under redistricting?
Well, you want to?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty much common sense. If one party controls, the legislature, and the legislature to draw the lines, you probably have a sense of where the lines might get drawn. So yeah, I think something that would be considered truly independent probably would provide for fair elections.
We did have our largest number of pickup seats after the citizens redrew the line, so I'll take either way.
And Democrats have also benefited before the commission when there has been a deadlock, a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, and the plans went to the courts. The courts did a better job gerrymandering Democratic districts than the Bermans did.
Another question. This gentleman up here and has had his hand up for a while.
My name is Mike Wright, and I'm a student at University of California, Berkeley. My question is primarily for Professor Rivers regarding your data that you presented. First of all, why did you choose to compare a presidential elections turnout with a off year, with a non-presidential elections turnout, and versus, say, comparing 2014 to 2010? And then second, it seems like you made some perhaps I just misunderstood, but you made some large assertions about the effect of turnout in these elections. How could you do that with, seems like there are not many data points to really make that election, you got that assertion, two elections in there. So anyway, please correct me on this.
So 2014 looks a lot like 2010, so there'd be more stability between those. I think the question was, why was 2014 different from 2012, which was just 2 years ago? Sure, there's lots of things you can say about turnout. I'm trying to be a little contrarian here to say that there's less there that's consequential than people normally believe. Everyone's hope is you can take those 50% of the people who aren't voting in midterm elections and somehow convert them to one party or the other and change the outcome. And the fact is that's not what happened. And despite all the efforts that parties make to get voters to turn out, because that's the only lever they can move, it actually doesn't in the end swing the outcome much.
So you're making us think. So we've reached the end of our time with no thanks to Sherry, but she was good anyway. And we'd like to
protest at the end. Follow me.
We'd really, really like to thank these panelists for all their contributions today.
Thank you. Thanks.